Elijah. Last week we looked at this prophet and found that God provided for him in many different ways. We've been looking at conquering challenges with God's mighty power. And the first week we looked at the fact that God has the power to forgive. And we looked at Jesus on the cross and how he offered forgiveness to those who actually put him on the cross. And then offered forgiveness to the thief that was beside him as well. And we know that God has the power to forgive because we have experienced his forgiveness as well. And last week, we looked at the fact that God has the power to provide. And we began our journey with Elijah. And we looked at the fact that Elijah was one of the last prophets and how he withdrew. He confronted Ahab and then withdrew. And for 3 years, the ravens supplied him with bread and meat. And then he moved on from there and went into a village. And the widow, she was about to make up her last piece of bread. And Elijah asked her for some, and she said, well, and he told her, your jug of flour and your jug of oil will never run dry until the rain starts again. And then there was a dramatic healing of the widow's son. And this week we come upon Elijah once again, and we're going to be entering into his journey this morning. But before we begin, I have a funny for you. A fellow by the name of Bob Thornapple, he's watching TV, and in walks his son. And Wilberforce is his son. He's all decked out in his baseball outfit. His dad asks him, so how did the Little League practice go today? And Wilberforce growled, terrible. I struck out 3 times. Trying to encourage his son, his dad said, well, that's all part of the game, son. And Wilberforce looked at him with this exasperation. He said, but Dad, it's only T-ball. Imagine striking out in T-ball. So we come to Elijah. Elijah has spent the last 3.5 years, one for 3 years in seclusion, being fed by God. And one of the reasons why he was in seclusion and being fed by God was to prepare. To prepare for the challenges that were just ahead. And then when he went with the widow, again, to prepare, to get ready. If you turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 18, we're going to be looking at how God provides an amazing victory. Because you see, up to this point, God has been preparing him for the challenge that's about to happen. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 16, it says, so Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him. Elijah and Obadiah had a little conversation. Elijah told Obadiah to go to him. And so he went to him and he told him. He said, Ahab went to meet Elijah, and he told him. And Ahab then went to meet Elijah. And when he saw Elijah, he said to him, is that you, you troubler of Israel? I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now he tells them, I'm heading up onto the mountain, up to Carmel. And I want you to bring all 450 prophets of Baal, all 400 prophets of Asherah, and I want you to gather there. And so Ahab sent word throughout Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. And Elijah went before the people and said, as he's going to the people of Israel, he says, how long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. But the people said nothing. Think about that. He is calling them because Ahab and Jezebel have, in one sense, almost turned the whole nation of Israel against Jehovah God. And so he's coming through and he's saying to them, if God is king, if God is Lord, follow him. But if Baal is God, well, follow him. And then we see the text. We find Baal, the prophets of Baal, and Elijah come together. And Elijah says to the prophets of Baal, he says, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire. So that the bull given them, so they took the bull given them and prepared it. And then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. O Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered, and they danced around the altar they had made. You have to realize one thing here. Baal is considered the god of fire. So what should come from Baal? Fire should come down. And so they're beseeching their God, who is the God of fire, to send fire down and to light up the altar, to bring on this sacrifice. And so then at noon, Elijah began to taunt them. And he says, shout louder. He said, surely he is God. Perhaps he's deep in thought. Or maybe he's busy. Or maybe he's traveling about. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened. So shout louder. And so they shouted louder. And then they started to slash themselves. They started to try to draw blood to bring about their God to answer. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Do you remember what Elijah said? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. All day, these prophets of Baal have been jumping and hooting and hollering and trying to get Baal, who is no God at all, to respond. Then Elijah said to all the people, come here to me. And they came to him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins. He took 12 stones. He made the altar anew. Set up everything for the sacrifice. And then he dug a trench around that. And it says that it was large enough to hold 2 shayas of seed. Now, 2 shayas of seed is basically about 15 liters. So it's a fairly big trench that they had there. 15 liters of whatever could fit in this trench. And so he arranged the wood, cut the bowl into pieces, laid it out on the wood, and then he said to them, now, fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Just to make his point. What did he say? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. Watch this. They pour the water, these 4 large jugs of water, onto the thing. He says, do it again. One time isn't enough. Do it again. And then he says, do it a 3rd time. Have you ever tried to start a campfire out in the woods when it's been raining? Well, if you really want to do it, you could go out tonight and do it. I heard that there's a little bit of rain coming today. And see if you could try to start it up after so much water has been put onto the wood. And so at the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and he prayed. He didn't hoop and holler. He didn't start to slash himself or anything. He prayed. He came before our God and he said, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant and have done all these things answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and you are turning their hearts back again. Then, the fire. I got a nice picture back there. The fire of the Lord came down. And when the fire fell, it burned up the sacrifice. It burned up the wood, the stones, the soil, and licked up all the water in the trench. And when the people saw this, what was their response? They fell. They fell and worshiped. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Then Elijah commanded them to seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let any of them get away. They seized them. They took them down into the valley, and there they killed them. And Elijah said to Ahab, one amazing victory. The prophets of Baal should have had the ability to bring the fire, because He is the God of fire, but no fire. The true God, the God of Israel, there's where the fire came. And so then Elijah said to Ahab, go and eat and drink, for there's the sound of heavy rain coming. How long has it been since it rained on the land? Do you remember? 3.5 years it has not rained. And what was it that Elijah said to Ahab? He said, way back, he said, it's not going to rain until I pray. And so then he tells him, go. Rain's coming. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down on the ground, and put his face between his knees. He said, go and look toward the sea, he told his servant. And he went up and he looked. There's nothing there, he said. 7 times, Elijah said, go back. And the 7th time the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. And so Elijah said, go, tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds and the wind rose. A heavy rain came on, and Ahab rode off to Jezebel. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and he tucked his cloak into his belt, and he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezebel. He got there before her. How many times did it take for him to, in his prayer time, for the rain to come? We just read it. You can all say it together. 7 times, right? How many times have you felt that, God, are you listening? God, are you listening? He prayed once, just a few hours before this, for fire to come from heaven. And the fire came down. But now he's praying for the rain to come. And he needs to pray 7 times. One of the things I see in this is never give up, because God can give us an amazing victory. Don't be discouraged. Don't get down when your prayer just doesn't seem to be answered. Don't give up. Don't surrender. Continue on. A man stopped to watch a Little League baseball game one day, and he asked one of the youngsters what the score was. And the little fella said, oh, we're losing 18-0, was the answer. Well, said the man, I must say you don't look all that discouraged. Discouraged, the boy said. How can I be discouraged? We haven't even yet got up to bat. Don't be discouraged. Don't get discouraged when it seems that God is not answering. Seek His face. Seek His face. But something happens. Elijah then flees out of fear. Can you imagine? He was face to face with 850 prophets, all going in a frenzy. Fire came down from heaven. Then he goes out and he prays. The rain starts. Look what it says in chapter 19. It says, now Ahab took Jezebel, everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." And it says Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. He is standing before 850 prophets, and he is not afraid. He goes seeking for the rain to come, and he is not detracted. But one woman comes before him and says, "You better watch yourself, because you're going to die." And he gets afraid, and he takes off. Fear is a very powerful foe. Have you ever experienced fear? I know we all have. We could probably sit around and share all kinds of stories about experiencing fear, of facing fear. But here's Elijah. He's experienced God's amazing provision. He has overcome insurmountable odds. And then he's overcome with fear. Have you ever been paralyzed by fear? Have you ever fled from something because of fear? I love what it says in Psalm 73. It says, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." My flesh and my heart may fail. I may fail in my humanity, in who I am, but God is the strength of my heart and the portion, my portion forever. He is able to overcome anything. We don't need to fear because we have our God on our side. What was it that JFK said? "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." You know, when I become fearful, the thing that I do, I come before my God. As it says, "I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds." When I experience fear, I come before God. And I ask Him, "Take this fear away." I come using the full power of God, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension, the full work of Jesus. I claim that authority and that power that He has given us against all fear. In Isaiah 41 it says, "All who rage against you will surely be ashamed and disgraced. Those who oppose you will be as nothing and perish. Though you search for your enemies, you will not find them. Those who wage war against you will be as nothing at all." Can we read this last sentence together? "For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, 'Do not fear, I will help you.'" Do not fear, I will help you. We need to come before Him. Elijah ran. He was afraid. And it says that he came to a broom tree. He sat down under it and he prayed that he might die. He says, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and he fell asleep. An angel of the Lord came to him, touched him, said, "Get up and eat." And he looked around, and there by his head was a cake of baked bread and over some hot coals and a jar of water. And he ate and he drank and he laid down again and he fell asleep. The angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up, he ate and he drank, Strengthened by the food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the Mount of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. It almost sounds like he was dealing with a little bit of depression there, doesn't it? He went and he was done. I've had enough, Lord. I've had enough. I want to die. Take my life. And then he fell asleep, and God came to him in that sleep, touched him, fed him, to restore him. Even in the midst of his downheartedness, God came to him, touched him, said, "Get up, get up. Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. You need to be strengthened by holy bread, by holy water." And then we come to where we saw, where we read earlier. But I wanted to share with you one quote that I read this week about fear from Sarah Young in her devotional. And this is written from the perspective that Jesus is speaking to us. And he says, "My guidance for each of my children is unique. That's why listening to me is so vital for your well-being. Let me prepare you for the day that awaits you and point you in the right direction. I am with you continually, so don't be intimidated by fear. Though it stalks you, it cannot harm you. As long as you cling to my hand, keep your eyes on me, enjoying peace in my presence." You see, we need to remember that God is with us, that he is beside us, and that he offers to us comfort and encouragement. A fellow by the name of Stevie Nichols shared this. He says, "About a month ago, I bought my 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, an aquarium. And we went together to the pet store to pick out 4 fish to put into the tank. Well, one day, one of the fish died when Sarah was at her grandparents' house. My wife, she flushed it down the toilet, and we didn't tell my daughter about it. This morning, Sarah found one of the other fish dead. She found it caught up in some of the fake bushes. My wife called me at the office and said that Sarah had something to tell me. And so in her 2-year-old way, she explained to me that the fish had died. She had found it in the bushes, and she and Mommy were going to have a funeral for it in the backyard. And I realized that this was the first of many losses that she would experience in life. He says, I broke into tears. However, when the last thing she said to me before she hung up on the phone was, Daddy, keep me from getting caught up in the bushes. Keep me from getting caught up in the bushes." I think that's what Elijah was saying to God in a different way, but very much the same sentiment. I need you, Father. I need you to bring to me comfort and encouragement. And so he goes, and the Lord comes to him. The Lord passes by, it says. And there was a powerful wind that tore apart the mountains. There was an earthquake. There was fire. And God was not in any of those. But it was the gentle whisper. It was the gentle whisper. God still speaks today. We may think Elijah was the amazing prophet and that God may not speak anymore, but God still speaks through those gentle whispers. In 2 Corinthians 1:4 it says, He comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort others, as Noah had shared earlier with the boys. He comforts us so that we can comfort others. You see, our God came to Elijah, comforted him, and then sent him on his journey again. He lifted him up spoke to his heart, and then he says, go back the way you came. Go to Damascus, anoint this guy king, then anoint Jehu king, and then anoint Elisha as the next prophet to come along. God lifts him up, places him where he needs to be so that he can continue on. I remember hearing the story of Ira Sankey. Ira Sankey was one of D.L. Moody's associates. And one day he was traveling on a steamer down the Delaware River. And he was recognized by some of the passengers. And they came up to him and asked him, Ira, we would love for you to be able to sing one of the songs that you've composed. And, well, he said, no, I would much rather sing a hymn written by William Bradbury, Savior, like a shepherd, lead us. And then he led them in singing that hymn. And one of the stanzas, it begins, we are thine, do thou befriend us. Be the guardian of our way. Be the guardian of our way. And when he finished, a man stepped out of the shadows and he said, Mr. Sankey, were you ever in the army? Well, yes, I was. I joined in 1860. He said, Mr. Sankey, did you ever do guard duty in Maryland, maybe around 1862? And he said, yeah, I did. He said, Mr. Sankey, I have something to confess to you. I was in the Confederate Army. I was a sniper. And I saw you one night outside that fort in Sharpsburg. I had my gun sight on you. You were standing there in the light of a full moon. And just as I was about to pull the trigger, you began to sing. And it was that same hymn that you just sang here tonight. The man told an astonished Sankey, I couldn't shoot you. God has been protecting, walking with Elijah through ups, through downs, and around the bends. And God has been with him the whole way. In John chapter 14, Jesus said this to his disciples as he's getting ready to go to the cross. He says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. We need to remember that our God is with us. We need to take his right hand. We need to walk with him. I wanted to share one last story with you before I close. And this is one that comes from Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It's a story of the French Revolution. And each day there was a grim procession that would happen of prisoners, and they would make their way on the streets of Paris to a guillotine. And one prisoner, Sidney Carton, a brave man who had once lost his soul but now had found it again, had come back to Christ, was now giving his life for his friend. And beside him there was a young girl. And they had met before in prison, and the girl had noticed this man's gentleness and his courage, and she said to him, if I may ride with you, will you let me hold your hand? I'm not afraid, but I'm a little weak, and I need to be given more courage. And so they rode together, her hands in his, and when they reached the place of execution, there was no fear in her eyes. She looked up into the quiet, composed face of her companion and said, I think you were sent to me by God. You see, in all the dark valleys of life, God our Father, the God of all comfort, in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ, is at our side, walking with us. We see in Elijah an amazing witness. But we need to remember that